some questions with regard to Cambodia in particular. So I just wanted to ask, does the department share the concerns about the human rights conditions in Cambodia outlined by Amnesty International and corroborated by other leading NGOs and governments, including the US?
Well, I'll ask Mr. Cox to add if he wants to, but we do have some concerns about the human rights situation in Cambodia, and we have raised those not only in the appropriate multilateral forums, but also directly with the Cambodian government, including during Foreign Minister Bishop's most recent visit there last weekend.
In particular, could you outline to me which of the human rights concerns that you raised, or you have concerned? What are they?
Alistair?
Well, Senator Alistair Cox, First Assistant Secretary, South East Asia Division. At the recent UN Universal Periodic Review, Australia made a statement on human rights at that time, and that was reiterated by Minister Bishop during her meetings in Cambodia last week. So she reiterated the key points of that statement at Geneva.
So what were the key points? What is the main concern Australia has?
Well, we were concerned about the violence on the 2nd and 3rd of January when violence broke out against garment workers and other protesters in Phnom Penh. We have been concerned about just the general situation of some of the protesters over the situation, the political standoff in Cambodia, but the Minister was also able to welcome the 18th February agreement between the government and the opposition to work on electoral reform processes going forward. So we did reiterate our concern about the human rights situation, but also encouraged the government and the opposition to work on compromises on the electoral reform agenda.
So on the electoral reform agenda in particular, you would be aware that opposition leader Sam Rainsy and others have been calling on the international community, including Australia, to condemn the electoral irregularities that occurred at the election, and the only reason the opposition agreed to that proposed deal, if you like, with Hun Sen was that they actually looked at the irregularities, and I understand that hasn't happened. Why didn't Australia or did the department advise the Minister or the Prime Minister to raise internationally concern about the irregularities in the election in Cambodia?
Senator, well, we don't go to the content of our advice to the Minister.
Okay, so I'll ask the Minister, did the government consider making some public statement about the irregularities in the vote in Cambodia, given that the opposition there was calling for it and Australia's role previously in Cambodia?
I'll take that on notice.
Thank you. So given what you've just said about violence, about the situation, the crackdown on the protesters, about the impending likelihood of further national strike in Cambodia, can you tell me, has the department provided advice to the Minister in relation to sending asylum seekers that have arrived in Australia to Cambodia?
I think that goes to the content of advice to the government, Senator.
Well, I asked, has the department provided advice?
Yes, but then you went on to describe with particularity in a way that were the question to be responded to might reveal the content of any advice which may or may not have been provided.
All right, well, let me ask another question. Did the Minister ask in Cambodia for the Cambodians to take asylum seekers from Australia?
I'll take that on notice.
Well then, can you confirm that reports have been made in the press that Hun Sen would take serious consideration of the request? Are you able to confirm that any request was made in relation to asylum seekers by the Minister?
Well, I think that's really the same question as you asked a moment ago, so I'll take that on notice.
So perhaps then you would take on notice whether there was any conditionality put by the Minister to the Cambodian government about Australian aid and taking of asylum seekers.
Well, these questions about whether an issue was raised with the Cambodian Minister by Ms Bishop are all questions that I will take on notice.
All right. Then in terms of international action, apart from what you have just outlined in terms of the United Nations processes, is there any other action that the Australian government has taken with regard to election irregularities in Cambodia? Have we raised it in any other forum apart from the discussion you just referred to from the Minister with the government there on her recent visit?
Well, the Australian ambassador in Phnom Penh is in regular contact with the government in Phnom Penh about a range of issues and has raised concerns about the situation on the ground there in different dialogues with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and with other agencies of the Cambodian government, and is monitoring the situation very closely. So we do that through our embassy in Phnom Penh, Senator.
What about with the United Nations? Has Australia registered any concern about the election irregularities in Cambodia through other UN processes?
Well, as I said, at the UN Human Rights Council during the Universal Periodic Review on the 28th of January, we did just that.
And that's the
appropriate vehicle through which to do that. Yes.
Yes, that's what I'm just trying to establish. That is the only vehicle through which we've done it.
Yes, that's the most appropriate vehicle through which to do it. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.